Like Rihanna said, Shlomo Weiss, I run the cloud solutions business for the software monetization division at SafeNet, where we enable both on-premise and cloud software vendors to monetize their software through licensing, provisioning, entitlement management, and metered usage. What I want to speak about today is based on a trend that we've been seeing over the last year from our customers, where a lot of ISVs have been coming to us asking to help them monetize their solutions and their services through a usage-based business model. So we see a big trend of the market going to pay-per-use business. And what I want to talk about is why that's happening, how the ISVs are approaching it, and then some of the things to keep in mind if it's something that you're considering to do for your own business. So to start it off, I just want to talk a little bit about some analyst information. So this is done by Forrester. Forrester went to enterprises, and they asked them, how are you licensing the software that you're purchasing today? And what is your preferred way of licensing software in the future? So I want to highlight just two parts of that study that they did. One is what the feedback that they got related to pay-per-use licensing, and the other is based on flat rate subscriptions. So when the enterprises answered, we're talking about their cloud-based software that they're licensing, they said currently about 45% of that software is based on a subscription, flat rate subscription pricing model, and 28% is on a pay-per-use model. But going forward, what they're interested in is using more and more services that are charging them pay-per-use for the software. So moving to a pay-per-use type of model, up to 45%, and basically flipping the equation so that 31% will come from flat rate subscriptions. On the other hand, the enterprises were also talking about their on-premise software. And 25% of the on-premise software that these enterprises are currently consuming, they're paying for on a flat rate subscription, and 7% are paid for through a pay-per-use model. And they see that pay-per-use increasing as well to 20%. So this is 20% of on-premise software that they're going to be paying as a per-usage basis. And so that's what I want to focus this talk on today. On the pay-per-use, on the cloud software that the cloud software market is offering, as well as within the on-premise software, and how that all ties in together. So when our customers come to us, again, the ISVs, and they say, yeah, we want to move to pay-per-use, and we ask them why. They say, well, because their enterprises customers are saying to them, you know, this cloud thing is fantastic because it's elastic. Right? So the cloud is elastic. We can spin up instances on AWS. We can turn them down when we don't need them. This morning, the speaker from Netflix mentioned that the average instance that they use, the life cycle of that instance is 36 hours. And so the enterprises are really getting used to paying for their cloud infrastructure that way. But what they're telling the ISVs is that cloud software, on the other hand, is not elastic. Right? They're basically saying, yeah, we have this promise of an elastic cloud software because the market has been telling us that we can buy pay-as-you-go subscriptions. Right? The SaaS market has been marketing themselves as saying we offer pay-as-you-go subscriptions. This is even from a pricing page of one of the most popular SaaS vendors, where in the small print it says, but it requires an annual contract. And so the enterprises are telling the ISVs, this is great you're telling me that it's pay-as-you-go, but it's a subscription. Right? So when I'm as a consumer and I hear pay-as-you-go, what that means to me is I can pay if I use it. If I don't use it, I don't have to pay. A subscription to me means that I'm paying for it whether I'm using it or not, whether it's a monthly subscription, a quarterly, annual, 3 years, or whatever the term is. And so the customers are getting smarter, and they're saying, well, you know what? Subscription is not pay-as-you-go. We were actually at a customer meeting at the beginning of this week, a large customer of ours here in the Bay Area. They're one of the leading technology companies here. And we met with the CIO, and when we were talking to her, she was talking about how they use Salesforce and how their CEO likes to go around, is very happy the fact that the Salesforce that they're using is really pay-as-you-go, and they can pay Salesforce for those users that are using it. Those that aren't using it, they don't. And she was really laughing about it because she said it's not really pay-as-you-go. Once a year, she sits down with Salesforce, and they look at what they've used in the past year, and they kind of renegotiate for the coming year, but it's an annual process that they have to go for, and it's these subscriptions that they're paying for whether or not they're using it within their organization. And so this is where the enterprises are coming from, and they're saying, yeah, subscription is not pay-as-you-go, we want pay-as-you-go. But then the next question is why? Why do they want this pay-as-you-go or pay-per-use type of a model? So what we've seen in talking to both enterprises as well as the ISVs that are supplying them is that it's pretty simple. It comes down to that people don't want to pay for things that they don't want to use. Right? What's been known in the market for a long time as shelfware. And it's been a problem we've had in the industry for on-premise for quite some time, but that's also creeping into cloud as well. And for what we've seen is, and this is overall software, that shelfware, based on analyst research, based on research we've done, based on customers, is that anywhere from 10 to 30% of the software sold is actually shelfware. So it's a problem in the industry for on-premise that people thought was going to go away with cloud because of this pay-as-you-go subscriptions, but it's just not true. It hasn't gone away. Getting back to Salesforce, without wanting to pick on them, so how many companies here use Salesforce? How many people use Salesforce within their companies? So SafeNet uses Salesforce. And in preparing for this presentation, I went to our IT administrator, who manages our Salesforce account, and I said, can you give me a report showing the licenses that we have for Salesforce and how many we're actually been using over the last 6 months? And so it turns out that on average, about 15% of our Salesforce licenses are going unused. So we're paying for them, but we're not using them. And the number of Salesforce users we have in SafeNet, it's a pretty large number when you look at 15% that's going to waste. And that's just one application. Right? And so the overall effect it has on the total IT software budget could be pretty significant when you're talking in numbers like that. And so the enterprises are saying, well, this is a big problem. So something a little bit from the ISV perspective, and this is just my own kind of back-of-the-envelope type of calculations. Based on that 10 to 30% range, I took a 10% being conservative shelfware, and based on IDC's numbers for the total software market of about $340 billion, and the SaaS or cloud software market of about $37 billion. So when you look at it, if you use those figures, then the entire cloud software shelfware problem is about $3.7 billion. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The major problem is, again, is on-premise, and that's how it's been for quite some time. And what's interesting, as we continue these dialogues with our own customers, and our customers talk about, okay, yes, they want to move to this pay-per-use type of a model, we really hear two different perspectives at a high level depending on where they're coming from. So if they're a pure cloud provider, what they say is this is an opportunity for us, this bottom half of this iceberg, because this is an opportunity for them to use an innovative type of a business model to go after these large incumbent on-premise software vendors that are selling all this shelfware to their customers, and the new cloud provider can come and offer a pay-per-use model in order to take market share from the incumbent. At the other end of the spectrum, the other types of customers we have are the on-premise vendors that come to us and say, we want to charge pay-per-use, even for our applications that we're delivering on an on-premise install. And they're looking at it from a defensive position. They need to defend that market share that they have on the bottom of this iceberg. And they'd rather themselves offer this new type of a cloud-like business model to their customers than have someone else come and do it instead. And so really when we talk to our customers, we have to understand which perspective they're coming from to see, are they a pure-play cloud vendor that's looking to take market share, or are they an on-premise vendor that's looking at this as a defensive position? So what are they doing? Right? So how are these companies that we're working with, how are they approaching this pay-per-use? So I'm going to give just 3 high-level real-world examples of customers, of ISVs that we're working with that are bringing their software to market in this pay-per-use model. Fortunately, I can't share the names because of confidentiality issues, but I'll give some details in the examples. So one is a pure cloud vendor. They provide software and services to help media companies with large file transfers. And they deliver that service through the cloud. They have worked through several cloud vendors, cloud platforms, including AWS and Azure. And what they do is they have customers, again, the media companies, that are doing this large file transfers. And there's different types of peaks and valleys of this usage depending on the events or whatever the media companies have to transfer. And so they help them with the software manage these transfers, and they charge their customers based on the bandwidth that's going through their systems during these media file transfers. And it's a postpaid postpaid consumption model based on the bandwidth that's being consumed. The second example is a hybrid type of model. It's an on-premise vendor that also has an additional cloud service. Essentially what they've done is they have an on-premise application that helps their customers run CPU-heavy business processes. And in certain times or certain peak either instances or events, the customers suddenly need additional capacity. And so they have the on-premise installation, but then they also add additional capacity by enabling them to get more capacity from the cloud. And so for this additional capacity, they also need to track the usage, understand how their customers are using it for on-premise, and then if they have this burstiness on the cloud, then they'll be able to charge them for that as well. And finally, the third example is a different type. It's an on-premise vendor. They're not delivering cloud software. They're continuing to deliver their software on-premise. What they do is they provide construction design software for the construction industry. And they want to be able to manage their licenses from the cloud in order to offer a cloud-like experience for add-on modules that they offer to their customers. So they have their base application that they offer with a more traditional floating type of a license. And then for additional modules that their customers only use periodically, do they charge them based on use through the cloud licensing system, but it's for an on-premise installation. So we see here is really three different types of companies coming from three different places. One is a pure cloud vendor. The other end of the spectrum is the on-premise vendor. And then the one in the middle is a mix, is a hybrid. But they're all using these pay-per-use type of models, leveraging the cloud in order to be able to provide their customers what they need. So when does it make sense to pay-per-use? Right? So I'm not advocating that everyone should just go to a pay-per-use model. It has to make sense for your business. So just a few things that we've learned from the market. The first one is pretty obvious. If your customers prefer it, then it's a good idea for you to go look into it and see if it's worth it for your business. The second is, and this is a little bit different than the shelfware issue, but it's to cover the cost of consumption. So if you're providing a service that has heavy resource consumption, where specific customers, like for example, in the media space or others, that are using a lot of resources, whether it's bandwidth, whether it's storage, whether it's compute capacity, then it's worth it to explore charging in addition to either in addition to or exclusively based on usage. A third, and this, think back to the iceberg chart, is competitive pressure. Are you a cloud vendor that's coming after an existing space that you can come in with an advantage in the market in order to take market share from an incumbent on-premise vendor? Are you an on-premise vendor that wants to defend your territory against the new cloud vendors by offering this kind of a cloud-like business model? In addition, bursty customer usage. So there are certain applications which there's pretty steady use, but there are others where it really fluctuates over time or over specific events or whatnot. And in many cases, it's a good idea to explore a usage-based model for that type of scenario. Another, and this goes back to the previous slide where I showed the on-premise application vendor, where they have their base license, or it could be on a base subscription, but that there are add-on modules that are also only used periodically or maybe in certain instances that you might want to charge based on use because your customer is not going to subscribe to those for an unlimited, a specific time, and they just want to use it periodically. So again, it's similar to this next point, which is the periodic use. There's also different types of users in an organization. Right? Think back to the Salesforce example, where you'll have your salespeople that are using Salesforce on a daily basis, but you might have someone in management that just needs it for reporting. So wouldn't it be nice to be able to pay subscription for the ones that need it every day, but then be able to pay on a usage-based model for those that just need it periodically for reports or whatever it might be. And finally, for usage overages. So you can also offer a subscription. We've seen many companies doing this, where they have a base subscription, but there's some sort of limitations in terms of what that subscription includes. But the customer has times that they want to use it above and beyond that subscription. And so you can track usage in order to charge them for any overages beyond that, similar to kind of a mobile phone plan. So these are some of the main things that we've seen that customers and ISVs are looking at when they're considering usage. And of course, it makes sense for everyone to analyze it from their own business perspective to see if it makes sense for them. Just one thing to consider to keep in mind, and this is a common objection that we come across, or that the ISVs that we work with come across from their enterprises, is that the enterprises are not all set up today to be able to purchase software on a per-use basis. Right? Their budgeting cycles and the way they do their planning is not set up for this in many cases. And so what we recommend is to look at a few different things that you can do in order to counter this. One is to offer a prepaid model instead of postpaid. So you sell a prepaid pool of whatever the usage metric, whether it's based on transactions, number of times using a specific module, resources, et cetera. And then you have to have the ability to count that down per user or per customer, and then set those limits so that when they're reaching the end of the pool, they can go out and they can purchase an additional pool, and you give them more access to those resources. A second way to counter it, and this is important no matter what, whether the customer has this issue of how they budget it, A second thing to do is to make sure that your customers have access to the usage data. The customers don't want to be surprised. They want to be able to see what they're consuming, how much it's going to cost them so they can plan it accordingly. And they don't want to just get the bill at the end of the month, the end of the quarter, whatever the billing cycle is, and be surprised. You have to make sure that you have that usage data available for your customers to be able to see it. The third point is you can consider capping usage for these customers. So it's almost the reverse of the prepaid. You can charge them in a postpaid model, but then cap how much usage they can have so that they have the predictability in place of knowing, okay, we can budget according to this because we know we're not going to go over this certain limit that we've set. They're reaching that limit, then you can come back and say, okay, let's open up additional capacity for you. And finally, make it easy for your customers to understand your pricing schemes. You have to keep it simple. You could charge based on usage, but don't do it off of 100 different types of metrics. Keep it as simple and straightforward as possible so that the customer understands exactly what they're paying for and what to expect during that billing cycle. So I think these things are critically important, again, in order to overcome some of these objections that the customers might have, or some of the customers might have in going to pay-per-use. And finally, you have to make sure that you have the right systems in place. Because all these things could get complicated if you're doing this in some sort of a manual process. So the first thing is you have to make sure you have the systems to be able to collect that usage at a granular level, at the feature level, so you know how to track that and know what to eventually charge for. You then have to be able to aggregate that usage. It could be across multiple nodes, multiple geographies. And again, you have to associate that usage. It's not just general usage. You have to associate it with a specific user or a specific customer, see what they're entitled to, and what pricing model that you're supposed to affiliate it with, so that you can then take that usage information and feed it into a billing system or even into an analytics system so that you can learn how your customers are using your systems, your service. And finally, the control is critically important, especially for things like trial conversion, or if you want to set those cap limits like I mentioned, or if you want to have prepaid models for renewals, for extensions. You have to make sure you have the control in place so that you can limit the usage and have the flexibility to be able to also increase the usage for each of those specific customers and users. And so just to summarize, we've seen this demanding increasing incredibly. I think it's about probably 80 to 90% of our customer engagements over the last 6 months to a year where the ISVs, whether they're on-premise or cloud providers, are coming to us and saying, help us get to a usage-based model. So we're seeing that increasing demand. I recommend you evaluate your business. Right? There's many different factors to take into place, and I mentioned some of them to see if it makes sense for your business to go down this path. And then finally, make sure that you have the systems in place in order to track that usage, to aggregate it, to control it, and finally to bill for it. So just my one salesy type of slide. SafeNet, we actually have a solution that can help you do this. It's called Sentinel Cloud. It's a cloud-based service to help both on-premise as well as cloud-based software with everything from their licensing to provisioning to controlling and measuring their usage in order to help monetize their services. So we have a booth here as well, so you're welcome to come to our booth. We also have a drawing, so a giveaway that we're doing, so if you want to drop your card there. We also have a number of representatives here from SafeNet if there's any follow-up, if you have any questions. I have a couple of minutes left, so I'll just open it up if there are any questions here for now. If not, you can always catch me later. So, any questions? Yeah.
So what are some of the more effective ways or approaches you recommend to deal with customers who want to pay for what they use, but are also concerned about not ending up using too much or more than they've budgeted, or what might be too expensive?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Okay, yes. So yes, that's like I think I mentioned, it's one of the common objections. I think there's, the two primary ways is either with usage, typically either postpaid or prepaid model. So one way, like I mentioned, if it's a postpaid model, so you want the user to be able to consume it, but then only charge them after the fact, is to cap that usage for those customers that are concerned. So it could be based on capping the amount of bandwidth, the amount of transactions, or whatever it is the right metric is that you're using. So to cap that usage so that they know that what to expect, they're not going to go beyond that limit that they set. The other way is the prepaid model, where you're selling them a bulk of whatever the usage is, the type of usage that they're going to be consuming. And then when they start to hit those limits, or they rather count down, or they use that usage, then you can go ahead and sell them additional capacity. All right, anyone else? Okay, thank you very much.